James Gunn went through some seriously tough challenges in his career as a filmmaker. He turned a bunch of nobodies into a huge money-making franchise. He was Kevin Feige's right-hand guy during the Infinity Saga, and he helped build the most successful movie universe ever. He got canceled and fired by Disney and managed to come back. He did a soft reboot of one of the worst superhero movies in recent years, and somehow got people to like it. And he directed 2 shows about characters no one really cared about in a completely broken universe, and made them hits on HBO Max. But Superman is going to be his toughest challenge yet. And today, I'm going to explain why. The first big problem he's going to have to deal with is that he can't use his magic formula, the one that made him famous and got him the job as president of DC Studios. Since 2014, Gunn's basically been telling the same story. He gives us a bunch of foul-mouthed misfits with childhood trauma who went down the wrong path, but end up becoming a family and trying to redeem themselves. Even though they break the rules and kill people, they do the right thing in the end. For example, in the beginning of Guardians 1, Star-Lord is just a selfish, womanizing bounty hunter, but by the end of the movie, he's ready to sacrifice himself to save the whole universe. Gunn's characters are anti-heroes who are fun to watch because they don't follow the rules and flip the usual superhero script. But they're also inspiring because they're trying to be better. It's easy to connect with them since they deal with relatable issues, usually with their parents. Peter lost his mom, was abandoned by his dad, and then ended up fighting him to the death. Gamora and Nebula struggle to be accepted by their dad, who's a galactic conqueror. Polka Dot Man literally killed his mom because she abused him, and Chris did the same to his dad, who was a supervillain and also abusive. But not everything is drama. Gunn also does a great job balancing emotional moments and jokes. In the same scene, Drax can be making fun of how Mantis looks, while we're crying at Yondu's funeral. All that stuff is great, but Gunn won't be able to do the same thing with Superman. This guy's the ultimate pure hero, a total role model who almost never messes up. He doesn't kill, doesn't break the rules, doesn't swear, and doesn't have daddy issues, because his adoptive and biological parents both love him a lot. There's no way Gunn can reuse the formula that brought him success, because this movie's got a totally different kind of main character than he's used to writing. The only time he ever worked with a pure hero was in Super, a low-budget movie from 2010. That's where he introduced Holy Avenger, a Christian hero who was an absolute joke. Nobody took him seriously except the main character. Gunn's always made fun of characters like Superman because he feels more at home writing anti-heroes. And it only gets trickier from here, because Gunn can't even fall back on the story of a group of characters becoming a family. Even though some members of the Justice Society are going to show up in this film, they'll probably just be there to support Superman, not to share the spotlight with him. We're not going to see a bunch of metahumans with tons of screen time, like in the Guardians Saga or Creature Commandos. Besides, Clark's already going to have his own family from the start of the movie.
I got family.
Gunn also won't be able to use the tragicomic tone from his past projects. It wouldn't make sense for Superman to be cracking sarcastic jokes every 5 minutes like Star-Lord. Maybe Guy Gardner will throw in a few lines to break the tension, but Superman's stories aren't really known for being particularly funny. And on top of that, Gunn probably won't use classic songs during fun montages either, because that would mess with the tone of the film. Now, I'm not saying Gunn was a bad pick to direct a Superman movie, or that he can only tell one type of story. Before he got into superheroes, the guy made some pretty wild parodies with Sasha Grey, directed and wrote a horror flick, and wrote the remake of Dawn of the Dead. So he can totally adapt to different stories, tones, and characters, but he probably kept using that same formula over and over because it was working really well for him. The good news is that Superman already looks and feels different. The trailers look solid, and I'm pretty happy with everything Gunn's been saying in interviews. You can tell he genuinely likes Superman, and he's not just pretending by name-dropping the 5 best-selling comics like he's been a lifelong fan. I'm glad he only used instrumental music in all the trailers, and stayed away from the alt-rock and indie songs he usually uses. Not that I don't like his taste in music, but Superman is way more solemn than the Guardians or Peacemaker, so Come and Get Your Love wouldn't fit the tone of the movie. So far, he's only included one joke in the trailers, and the visual style doesn't resemble his other movies at all. They use the Lightstree Elmar lens, a wide-angle lens that totally changes the look of the shots. Things seem to be going well, but Gunn's gonna have to step out of his comfort zone. I know that on paper, a Superman movie should be way safer than doing a soft reboot of Suicide Squad. Gunn has more source material to work with, and Superman's got a much better rep than any of the characters he's tackled before. Everybody knows who Superman is, so there's no need to retell his origin story or reinvent the character. And as long as he does a decent job, Superman should easily make more money than any other movie he's done, because he's really popular.
They love me.
But these high expectations are also a challenge. Up until now, Gunn's been the underdog, the guy no one saw coming, but who always ended up surprising everyone and delivering more than expected. I know that sounds weird, because he's done a bunch of successful projects, but consider this. Guardians was a big gamble for Marvel. The MCU was still finding its footing, and up to that point, they had only introduced major characters like Iron Man and Captain America. Nobody really cared about a movie starring a bunch of C-listers who didn't even sell that well in the comics. Also, aside from the Infinity Stone subplot, there wasn't much in Guardians 1 that tied into the rest of the MCU. That's why a lot of people thought it was gonna flop, because it felt like an experiment. But the movie was awesome. People loved it, and it did great at the box office. Same thing happened with the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker. Everyone thought Gunn had totally lost it when Warner announced a kind of soft reboot of Suicide Squad, with him at the helm. The 2016 version hadn't done terribly in theaters, but no one actually liked it. But once again, the story and characters won people over. Sadly, it didn't do well in theaters, thanks to the pandemic, DC's bad rep, and Warner's terrible policy of releasing movies in theaters and on HBO Max at the same time. But both audiences and critics really liked the film. Then Gunn made a spin-off about a character everybody hated. Once again, everyone thought this was the worst decision ever, and that the show would tank, because nobody cared about Peacemaker. But Season 1 ended up being one of the most watched series on HBO Max, and one of the best rated projects in DC's history.
Wow.
And all of this happened again last year, with the release of Creature Commandos. Even though Gunn was already a big name and the head of DC, people kept saying no one was gonna watch an animated show about a bunch of nobodies, who hadn't even had a comic since the early 2000s. But once again, the show was awesome and surprised everyone. But now, for the first time since Gunn became a director, people actually expect something from one of his projects. Superman isn't the kind of movie that can just fly under the radar, or that people don't care about. Supes is the first superhero. He's in the top tier of the most well-known heroes on the planet, and he's the favorite of millions of fans around the globe. Nobody had Star-Lord posters on their bedroom walls before Gunn made Guardians 1, but people were in love with Superman long before James was even born. And this could be a problem, because there's no way for Gunn to surprise us like he did with his previous projects. Just telling a good story isn't enough this time. Everyone already assumes a Superman movie has to be good, and if it's not, people will never let him forget it. Nobody would have freaked out if Creature Commandos had flopped, except maybe the Warner execs, who put money into the show. But if Superman ends up being a bad joke, Gunn can kiss superhero movies goodbye. He could go down the same path as Taika Waititi after Love and Thunder.
Don't ever mention his name again.
Plus, since Superman is a pop culture icon, Gunn can't mess with his origin story or his personality, just to fit the kind of story he wants to tell, like he's done with other characters. For example, the vigilante we met in the show is funny and can be pretty likable, considering the standards from Peacemaker. But aside from his costume, he's nothing like the vigilante from the comics. No one cared, because he's an absolute nobody. But if Gunn tries something like that with Superman, fans will hunt him to the ends of the earth. If you think I'm exaggerating, just remember fans were calling for Snyder's head when he had Superman kill Zod in Man of Steel. When it comes to a character this iconic, fans want to see their favorite version of Superman, the version they believe represents who he really is. It's not exactly fair, since Superman's been written by hundreds of writers over his 85-year history, and each one added something different to the character. But we don't get a live-action Superman movie every month, so fans get really picky. That didn't happen with Peacemaker, who had like 5 fans in the whole world at most.
Everybody hates my guts.
Just so we understand the difference, nobody complained that the Guardians didn't look exactly like their comic versions. But some people were already upset about Superman's suit, just from a blurry photo. It makes sense that fans are so picky, because Superman means a lot to them. But the problem for Gunn is that if he wants to keep everyone happy, he has to honor Superman's full legacy, including comics, animated shows, and the previous live-action versions. He's tried to do that using a remix of the John Williams theme, using the Kingdom Come logo, and giving us the best possible cast for almost all the characters. But until we see the full story, there's no way to know if this movie will respect Superman's legacy enough to satisfy all the fans. Because of all this, the movie already has some haters. There are people who've been hoping the new Superman flops since before DC even announced the reboot. If you check Twitter, you'll see folks with way too much free time trying to run boycott campaigns against Superman. And it's not just bots. Some of them are Snyder fans, who are still mad at Warner for not continuing Justice League, so they're against anything the studio does now. Others are Cavill fans, who are upset about how Warner treated the actor, and just aren't ready to accept a new Superman. And there are DC fans who treat this whole thing like it's a football match. They don't trust Gunn because he used to work for Marvel, and was super successful over there. So now they see him as the enemy who's gonna ruin DC, like he's secretly wearing a Marvel jersey under his jacket. No matter what he does, they're gonna complain. Just for the record, I think that's absolutely ridiculous. Imagine if Christopher Nolan wanted to direct something for Marvel, and all the Feige fanboys started attacking him, just because he used to work with DC. It's pretty dumb, but some people act like comic book publishers are rival sports teams.
This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
This is the first time Gunn's had to deal with something like this. Nobody was out there trying to sabotage Creature Commandos, because nobody cared enough about that show. But now, Gunn's stepping into a fandom war that's been going on long before he joined DC. To be fair, he kinda added fuel to the fire by being the one who hit the reset button and replaced the old cast, right when people were finally starting to like those actors. One way to bring fans together would have been to keep Cavill as Superman. His cameo in Black Adam was one of the few things that actually made everyone happy. But Gunn chose to recast everybody, except for the actors he personally liked. But let's be clear, I'm not in favor of trying to boycott any superhero movie, but I get why some fans are still against Gunn. To win them over, he's gonna have to make the best superhero movie ever. And even if he absolutely nails it, I'm pretty sure there's still gonna be a small group who keeps blaming him for killing the old DC universe. That brings us to the biggest challenge of all. If Superman flops, this universe is done. All of Gunn's past projects were basically gambles. Both Disney and Warner knew there was a chance they could fail because they starred characters nobody really knew. The MCU wouldn't have collapsed if people didn't like Guardians, and DC was already a dumpster fire when Gunn made the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker. But Superman is supposed to launch a brand new universe, so it carries the weight of selling us on the new DCU. If a Superman movie can't turn us into fans, then it's game over for them. And Gunn can't blame anyone else if that happens. He can't say the studio head didn't give him enough creative freedom, or that he was forced to cram in characters to set up the universe, because he's the studio head. Gunn took full responsibility for Superman and the rest of the DCU, because it's his universe. It's like if Kevin Feige directed Doomsday and Secret Wars. Big power, sure, but also big responsibility.
Say that again?
This is the first time Gunn has to make one of his projects a real success. But what does success even mean in this context? It could be a lot of money, good reviews, tons of hype, or maybe all of that and more. The reality is, Superman doesn't need to make $1 billion to be considered a hit. No one even agrees on the budget yet, so it's too early to crunch the numbers. What really matters is that people walk out of the theater happy. Warner execs, and Gunn himself, know it's probably not going to be the biggest blockbuster ever, because out of the last 10 DC movies, only one turned a profit. Those aren't good numbers for the studio, and it'd be crazy to expect one single movie to turn things around and make as much money as No Way Home. What they need is for people to leave the theater loving the characters, the story, and the universe, like what happened with Thunderbolts. That movie didn't make a profit from ticket sales, but people walked out of the theater really happy. Of course, box office still matters because of the kind of conversation it could spark online. We all saw what happened when The Flash bombed. Warner doesn't need another wave of videos, articles, and posts trashing one of their movies just because it flopped in theaters. We already know that's exactly what'll happen if Superman isn't profitable, since some people are already hating on it, and it hasn't even come out yet. But as long as it doesn't lose money, everything should be fine, and we could say Gunn pulled off the biggest challenge of his career. If Superman's a hit, then Gunn will have managed to kick off a second wave for DC. If you want to know how the studio ended up going downhill, then you gotta watch this video, in which I explain the rise and fall of the DCU.
Boring.